I've always found it interesting the way One Piece fans, to be precise, or to be more precise, Luffy fans, of which I am one by the way, often like to point out that villains and antagonists in One Piece, tend to underestimate Luffy when he's fighting them, which then leads to their defeat. We've seen it in most of the arcs so far, especially pre-time skip. Now, that is not to say that some of them don't enjoy the fight, right? Or recognize Luffy's strengths and capabilities during the fight. I mean, we see this quite clearly in Enies Lobby in his fights with Rob Lucci, and in Old Cake Island in his fight with Katakuri, and for those that are following Wano right now, in his fight with, Kaido. But there was still an underestimation that showed itself clearly before all the fights. This unshaken belief of them all that they can't be defeated, especially not by Monkey D. Luffy. However, in my reread of Dressrosa and in my surfing the net to read up on others' thoughts on the arc and in discussions I've had with other One Piece fans, one thing that everybody likes to say a lot about the arc and the fight present within it is that Doflamingo underestimated Luffy, and that is why he was defeated. Now, as a self-proclaimed Luffy fangirl, I find that a little insulting, especially because I've heard it said in tones that do not recognize or accord the appropriate respect for Gear 4 and just how incredibly powerful it is. When they make those statements in that tone, I interpret it as them basically saying, Luffy has plot armor. That was why he was able to defeat Doflamingo, and that is why he was able to help rescue Dressrosa. Now, I do agree with the first statement. Luffy does have plot armor. Duh. He is the protagonist of the story. Of course, the armor is staying in place until he becomes Pirate King. Oda is not going to needlessly try and subvert expectations by giving us a new MC when we're maybe another 10 years to the end of the story. Let's all be real. Gegakutami, Oda is not, and that is perfectly fine. I love both mangakas. One Piece and Jujutsu Kaisen are two of my favorite manga for two very different reasons. But back to One Piece and the Dressrosa arc. The conversation about Doflamingo's defeat has often been focused on him being like other One Piece antagonists and underestimating Luffy. And honestly, I disagree with that. If anything, the reverse is the case. Doflamingo never underestimated Luffy. Did he laugh at Boundman? Yes, of course. A lot of people did. Let's be honest. If you were the one fighting Luffy and all of a sudden he starts bouncing around and it looks weird, you would wonder if it was all a joke. Until he sends a King Kong gun down your throat, of course. But no, Doflamingo never underestimated Luffy. He was very well on his guard, even before Luffy showed up in Dressrosa, way before the Straw Hats showed up. He had put in all the contingency plans and had contingencies for his contingencies all put in place to ensure that he had every single one of his bases covered. Acquiring the Mera Mera no Mi, putting it up in the Colosseum for the fight, correctly guessing that Luffy would show up for that fight to get the fruit, putting plans in place to ensure that he never leaves, using Violet's abilities to track the Straw Hats, setting up the trap in Greenbit. He found a way to ensure that he blocked every avenue the Straw Hats could take to defeat him. That is not a man who underestimated his opponent. In fact, one would say is someone who was overly cautious about his opponent and the strange way he had been defeating other pirates and government officials and gaining notoriety in the process. Of course, the strange way is strange only to him being Doflamingo. Those of us, we who are following Luffy on his journey, know exactly why and how everything played out the way it had so far. So no, we can all agree that Doflamingo never underestimated Luffy. However, he did underestimate something else in the story, which was what led to his defeat. He underestimated chaos. Now, before you all go, chaos? Girl, what on earth are you talking about? Hear me out, okay? Let's look at it this way. Doflamingo represents order. And yes, I know, the irony of me stating that a pirate, who by his very nature should represent chaos, represents order. It sounds like I'm just pulling things out of thin air, but give me a second, let me explain. Pirates, by their very nature, are agents of chaos, yes. Theirs is the will to rebel against the order that is inherent in the law, established to protect the interests of the common man who are non pirates and the people in power. That is how they've always operated through the centuries, both in fiction and in some cases reality as well. Yes, the hierarchical system within which pirate factions operate have their own individual rules to keep order within said faction, but by their very nature, pirates are chaotic. However, Doflamingo is a bit different. Yes, he is a pirate, and yes, some would say he rebels against order by being a pirate. However, Doffy, contrary to his pirate status, maintains the natural order, both as a Shishibukai and as a former celestial dragon, with ties that still bind him to Marijua and gives him the power to call a sight on the whole world just for the sake of trapping Trafalgar D. Water Law. Sorry, I can't help it. I love saying his name in full. I love that man. Anyway, back to Doflamingo. Both from what we hear from other characters like Zoro's old bounty hunting colleague Yusaku and Vivi, to when we actually meet them, we learn that the Shishibukai were formed to help maintain order amongst other pirates by being the chaotic force of good for the Navy. Of course, a lot of them are self-serving and use the power in the system for their own good, but the other pirates who are non-Shishibukai do refer and think of them as Navy dogs. It is why Ace turned them down. It's why we know that if by some accident the role had been offered to Luffy, he would have laughed right in their faces before going to get himself a ton of meat as a reward for listening to such an absolutely ridiculous, bonkers request. We can say that the reason why Doflamingo joined the Shishibukai is because of the power they hold and the leeway it gives him to accomplish his interests. But if we also consider the fact that he is a former celestial dragon who are the self-proclaimed rulers of the world/continent, then we know that Doflamingo thrives off of having power and will do anything to keep that power, including maintaining the status quo that has given him said power. It's how his character is built and the driving force for a lot of the decision he makes in the manga, even from when he was a child. Therefore, we can draw the conclusion, the logical conclusion, that Doflamingo represents order in the divide with Luffy. The order of being one of the forces installed to keep other pirates in check and maintain order on the seas, and the holding onto his rightful title of being King of Dressrosa based off of the natural order and lineage of his ancestry, in that the Don Quixotes used to rule Dressrosa before they became celestial dragons. So, if we can conclude logically, based off of all of this, that Doflamingo represents the social order in One Piece, then it only makes sense that his natural enemy is chaos. And with the high number of agents of chaos present in Dressrosa at the time when the Straw Hats sailed on the Sunny into those waters, into that island, it was only logical that he would experience defeat at their hands. Starting with Fujitora. And I know once again you all are wondering how on earth I am speaking of Fujitora as an agent of chaos. He is an admiral after all, the representation of order in the One Piece world. And I would agree, except Fujitora lives by his code of moral/virtuous justice, which often puts him in a contrary position to the rest of the marine forces, especially Akainu. We all know just what kind of justice Sakazuki practices. But most importantly, Fujitora gambles. Now, before you go all but Noria, what on earth has gambling got to do with Fujitora being a chaos agent? You will have to consider gambling and what it entails exactly. Yes, it's all about beating the odds, but a core part of gambling is the unpredictability of the process and a reliance on luck. Now, if you're a mathematician, you're probably already typing or considering typing out an exhausting response and comment about how chaos theory works and how scientists and mathematicians have been putting it into practice to get some semblance of predictability in the unpredictable nature, in the seemingly unpredictable nature of gambling, and how this has been tested at roulette tables and various casinos. But that just solidifies my case. Why would scientists use chaos theory that was developed to try to find patterns in the randomness of chaotic complex systems if roulette games were not by their very nature chaotic? But anyway, I digress. This conversation is not about chaos theory, but about the fact that Fujitora, as an admiral that is given to gambling, who likes to weigh the odds and let the fates decide, as seen with him refusing to arrest the Straw Hats until the dice wills it so, is one of the chaos elements present in Dressrosa and instrumental to Doflamingo's defeat. It goes beyond him just refusing to arrest Law or the Straw Hats and encapsulates him actively helping the Straw Hats, stalling for time with Sabo, helping the people of Dressrosa to push back against the bird strains, even assuring Doflamingo of his defeat if he, Fujitora, discovers that Doflamingo deserves to be defeated. It is why we aren't surprised with him basically letting Luffy leave Dressrosa and eventually dismantling the Shishibigai system, one of the elements of the world order. Then there's Viola or Violet, the former princess biding her time until she can toss a spanner in the works of the operation of the Doflamingo family and save her own family. She was meant to be the eyes of Doflamingo, put in place to keep him abreast of the Straw Hats' activities once they enter the island. Except she sees the truth of Sanji's willingness to help her and decides to pitch her tent and stake her hope on the Straw Hats. Something quite revolutionary when you actually really do consider the fact that the Straw Hats and Law are pirates. Pirates, the same group of people who a decade prior sailed into a country, dethroned a father, killed her sister, and enslaved her people. And that is something her father mentions. It's something King Enrico Dodo mentions. He brings it up. And her choosing instead to trust in Luffy and the honesty of his Nakama was a radical thing to do, an absolutely chaotic choice that Doffy would not have ever imagined she would make. The same goes for the Tontatas, who had finally had enough and chose that day to revolt. They had already made their plans, not because the Straw Hats came into Dressrosa, but because in one of Doflamingo's power plays, where he had given them a moment of hope in his resignation as king, right? Only to plunge them back into the depths of despair by going on, psych, it was all a mistake. He had created the avenue where they realized enough was enough. They were going to fight back, take out one of his power sources, create a situation of absolute chaos with the toys regaining their humanity and those who had forgotten about them when they became toys, remembering them now that they are humans again, and use the chaos of that moment to deal the finishing blow. Everything they planned and didn't plan in its entirety, from Operation SOP to working with the toy soldier to befriending Usoland and Robbieland and their friends, were all done with the goal of creating a revolution in Dressrosa that would dethrone the Doflamingo family. And they succeeded, because revolutions are by their very nature an upsetting of the status quo that leads to no small amount of chaos, with the goal of making life better for those oppressed at the end of it all. Which is a perfect segue for the next agent of chaos on the list, Sabo, the revolutionary, who inherits Ace's will and fruit, gives Luffy the comfort of accepting that he survived and that he still has a brother in his corner and who willingly goes to bat for and fights for his little brother. Of course, we can't talk about Sabo's revolutionary activities in Dressrosa without mentioning Koala and Drac, also revolutionaries who are there to expose Doflamingo's status as Joker and his supply of weaponry. But back to Sabo, who also brought chaos into Dressrosa and who was instrumental in freeing up Luffy to chase after Doflamingo by fighting in his place in the Colosseum and being the one to win and eat the Mera Mera no Mi. Like I stated earlier, Doflamingo's plan in trapping Luffy in the Colosseum and forcing him to fight to recover his brother's fruit was actually quite genius. If other factors, i.e. Sabo, had not stepped in to provide the assistance Luffy needed and to cause mayhem, he actually would have succeeded. And then there's the toy soldier who never gave up, who kept fighting, being the spoke in the wheel that was the order of Doflamingo keeping Dressrosa running smoothly. He was just there, always disrupting things. He is the living embodiment of the chaos that rested beneath the surface of Dressrosa. One that never forgot but was always fighting with the hope to someday defeat the Doflamingo family. And of course, the people of the hour, the Straw Hats themselves, led by the most chaotic of all chaotic agents, Monkey D. Luffy. I'm not going to go into the many instances that showed quite clearly that the Straw Hats, by just existing or sailing into an island, are ready to shake things up, to destroy the status quo and restore a world where the people of the island can live quite fulfilling and satisfying lives. I mean, that is the story we've been following all the way through. And from the moment they showed up in Dressrosa, whether it was Luffy just casually revealing to the blind Fujitora that he's being cheated at the game he's playing, to Sanji abandoning his post to fall in love with a beautiful woman who ended up being an agent of Doflamingo and a former princess in need of aid, to Zoro stubbornly chasing after his stolen sword to get it back, which then has him meeting the Tontatas, to Usopp lying as he always does, which then resulted in him being roped into a revolution he never signed up for. The Straw Hats are the very personification of chaos. So, it only makes sense that the random decisions and choices they make throughout the arc bring them closer to the various chaos agents already in Dressrosa, who they then partner with to take down Doflamingo and free the island's people. So, like I said at the start of this video, Doflamingo never underestimated Luffy. It's quite unfair to him to say so. Instead, the conversation should be focused on the fact that he underestimated chaos, the capacity of what it can cause. And that is what set things in motion and what brought his world order crumbling down and why he was ultimately defeated.